All right, I'm gonna let everyone in. Hello. Hi, everybody. I'm gonna wait just a minute before we go ahead and formally get started, but thank you guys for joining. I see a lot of people are joining the room quickly, which is always a good sign. And I recognize a handful of names, so whether you've been with us for a Resi event in the past or if you're going to be coming to Resi San Diego, we certainly look forward to having you. All right. Perfect. Can you guys all see my screen without any issue?
Yep, looks good.
Wonderful. So, hello everybody. Thank you so much for joining this webinar. This is part of a handful of webinar series that we are doing in lead up to Resi San Diego, in which we are partnering with three incredible attorneys at Foley Hoag to help provide information on what we cannot help answer, right? So at LSN, we focus primarily on the fundraising component. So seed through Series B fundraising. However, we are no strangers to the fact that in the world of early life sciences, there is far more that will pose your way. And so we like to pull in partners of ours, specifically Foley Hoag, who is actually going to be a silver sponsor with us at Resi San Diego, to help give free education. And so I am going to do the quick introduction to LSN for those of you who might not know who we are and what we do. But at Life Science Nation, we are a data company. And so on the far left, you'll see that we have an investor database of over 4,000 global investors at the core of it. We track and work with investors across 10 different categories. So everything from venture capital, family offices, angels, and strategic groups to you name it. Really, anyone who writes a check, we work with. It's the second column here that people seem to be most familiar with, which is our Resi event. And so Resi is the in-person partnering event that we do typically 5 times a year, in which we bring anywhere from 400 to 850 investors is what we had at JPM last year. And we do it quite frequently. So we do 5 events a year. And the reason for that is if you are an early stage fundraising company and you come with us to Resi San Diego, we're going to be in Boston in September. And then at the start of the year, we do our biggest event, Resi JP Morgan in San Francisco, where we have 850 investors. And if you can follow us around to these three events, you've now had 60, 80, 100 investor meetings over the course of the next 6 months, which is a lot. But it is unfortunately what it takes to be successful in early stage fundraising. And so what we do, and I can brag about this because I have nothing to do with the investor recruitment, is we're very thorough in how we vet the attending investors. So every investor that signs up and attends Resi that you will see within that partnering platform has been interviewed and vetted by our team. One, to make sure that they are a legitimate investor, that they have a fund, that the fund is deploying capital, but also so that we can find out exactly where they invest. So we know what modalities, indications, what geographies and check size that they actually look to invest in, which we use to both populate the partnering platform at the actual Resi conference, as well as the investor database that I had brought up a moment ago. And all of that is done so that as an early stage fundraising company, you can spend your time and prioritize talking to investors that are actually a fit for what you're doing. And then the last component that I will bring up is our education. So at LSN Labs, we do a number of educational, entrepreneurial education aspects, which includes these free webinar series. We also have a product called BD Assist, in which we will actually set up investor meetings on behalf of our companies. And we have an AI agent, and that is a free company assessment report that you can fill out. It generates a 6-page report on your company's tagline, elevator pitch, and other materials that effectively prepare you not just to do a partnering event, but then to go on and do the next 9 to 18 months of fundraising. Um, and so the last thing that I will say is if you guys are not already signed up for Resi San Diego, I highly encourage it, especially if you're going to be out in San Diego. I know bio is going on consecutively. We specialize in early stage investors. So while bio is going to have, 10 to 12,000 delegates, there's going to be a lot of CROs, CDMOs, vendor groups, and all of the regional organizations. They conglomerate the industry. At LSN and with Resi, we're very focused. So if your goal is to raise capital, connect with strategic in-licensors, Resi will be the place to be. We're expecting about 300 investors to join us in San Diego in person. And so I would highly recommend signing up if you're going to be there. If not, we will be in September back in Boston for Resi Boston. And so the good news is I do have discount codes through that QR code. So if you can sign up, if you're not already, you can do 500 off the in-person partnering or $200 off either virtual or our audience access pass. And I have also included my email at the top. And so if you have any questions on Resi, the company assessment, or anything about LSN, please feel free to reach out to me directly. And so with that, I will stop sharing my screen and I will pass it on to the incredible team at Foley Hoag, who we greatly appreciate taking the time to join us today. And as I'm sure will provide a lot of educational content for you. So Jay, Ariana, and John, I will turn it over to you guys for introductions.
Great. Well, Max, thanks a lot for that. That was actually really, really helpful. The three of us are from Foley Hoag. We as a firm do a lot with the emerging company space with new entrepreneurs and licensing and intellectual property protection. So, huge amount of synergy between what we do as a firm and our focus and what Resi is seeking to accomplish as well, and its support of this ecosystem and this community. So, Max, thanks for being there. Thanks for putting this together. Thanks for giving us this platform. We really appreciate it. John, Ariane, and I put our heads together and we're thinking about what might be sort of fun to present. And what we kind of came up with was tips for the trip. So obviously there is a lot going on in San Diego next week. Obviously Resi, but yeah, there's another conference too. But yeah, a lot of deal making going on, a lot of people raising money, a lot of people looking for partners. The first question on everybody's mind is going to be, what's the IP look like? So the three of us thought that between the partnerships, the licenses, and the IP, we could give everybody some good tips and some things to think about for the road before you get there, so you can start thinking about conversations that you want to have and how to present yourself. Just the formal disclaimer, we're not your lawyers. You haven't engaged us. This is for educational purposes only. To the extent that you do actually want legal advice, obviously reach out to your attorneys for sort of specifics. Foley Hoag, we're a firm of over 350 attorneys. We are committed to the emerging company community. We are big in life sciences, huge patent practice, huge emerging company practice, big transactional licensing practice. My name is Jay
Sure.
Reilly. I'm a partner in the emerging companies practice. Like I said, we do a lot in company formations, seed financings, and venture financings, all the way to the exit. All the way to the M&A exit and even the IPO. I'll turn it over to my partner, John. John
Sure.
is head of the licensing transaction practice.
All right. All right. Thanks, Jay. So my name is John Harre. I'm a co-chair of the Licensing and Strategic Transactions practice. Jay failed to mention it, but he is also one of the co-chairs of that group. And our third co-chair is Sumi Sador, who is located in our Boston office. Jay and I are in Boston and are Washington. Um, the slide shows a bit of stats on the licensing group. One thing I would like to just note here, I mean, we do licenses. That's what is our main focus, but we do everything else. If it's a supply agreement, manufacturing agreement, service agreements, distribution agreements, clinical trial agreements, whatever type of agreement you need to move your facility, your company forward, we have done more than one, certainly, and can figure out the rest. Um, that's it. I'll turn it over to Ariana for the IP.
Great. Thanks, John. Yes. Hi, everyone. Great to be here today. I'm Ariana Harris, partner at Foley Hoag, and a registered patent attorney. I have a PhD in molecular medicine, so my practice is focused very much on the life sciences, which is why I'm here today, particularly what we consider, large molecules such as antibodies, nucleic acid therapeutics, cell therapies, and diagnostics. So we have a great intellectual property department here at Foley Hoag, which covers many practice groups, including the patent prosecution, strategy, and management group, which I'm a part of. But then it also includes trademarks, PTAB proceedings, patent litigation, trade secret and related rights litigation, and then advertising and marketing. Our IP department has about 150 members, 49 of those having PhDs. So it's a pretty big group, and we collaborate with all the practice groups and departments within Foley Hoag, including my great colleagues here, John and Jay, for licensing, company formation, all that fun stuff. So yeah, happy to be here and talk about IP and getting ready for Resi and Bio.
Great. Well, thanks to you both. So, obviously a lot of people are going to be looking for, interactions with investors. Investors are going to be looking for companies. Companies are going to be looking for money. Companies are going to be looking for potential targets, collaborators. Companies are going to be looking for potential acquirers and collaborators. And IP is going to be on everybody's mind. So the first part of this presentation, I'll just talk a little bit more about what it takes to find and attract the attention of investors. And John's going to talk more about the partnering aspect, the licensing aspects, and Ariana's going to talk more about the IP aspects. But we're all going to jump in and out. It's just going to be a little bit more of a discussion. Without further ado, the first thing that you as entrepreneurs need to do is find investors and find collaborators, and that can be tricky. If you're out there, you've been working days, nights, weekends for years, and you've written your deck and you've got a great story, but who do you tell it to? So how do you find that community of investors? So John, you and I were just talking about this last week. What tips do you have for finding those investors?
Well, I guess I would start with just be present in the community, right? Go to the partnering and investment conferences, go to the clinical and medical congresses, local business mixers, industry forums, academia symposia, wherever there's going to be a collection of folks in your space. You need to be regularly seen in those spaces. And I would just follow up with on Jay there. You've already got a lot of people in your network. They obviously know a lot of other people you don't know, so don't forget to use them to build your current network, right? Your attorneys, your current investors, your current business colleagues all know folks that you may want introductions to. All your people in your LinkedIn network, right? If you identify someone you want to talk to, personal introduction is always better than a cold call or a cold email. Look them up, see if there's a common link, and call them up and see if they can give you that personal introduction to that party. And then I'll end with a semi quote from an old movie, Glengarry Glen Goss. I don't know if anybody remembers that except maybe Jay. Always be selling your vision, the science, and your commercial strategy to everyone you meet in your system, in the ecosystem.
Yeah. One of the things that I love so much about this community, this network, the entrepreneurial environment is, I think generally people just want to help each other. People want to help build connections. If you reach out to somebody looking for a cup of coffee or a breakfast, they'll do it. And if they can't help you, by the time you've left, you'll have three more names of three other people who you can call who might. And it's not just important in terms of finding potential funders or potential collaborators, in terms of finding, potential, your next chief operating officer, your next CEO, your next CFO, finding attorneys, finding consultants, finding regulatory advice. It's so helpful having that community of people who you can reach out to and tap for that. But you really do have to be purposeful and mindful in building out that network and trying to build it and keeping it fed. And the same way that other people can help you out, you then need to be equally giving and help other people out and pay it forward as well. And that's kind of the magic of my experience in this industry is almost everybody I've reached out to has been really really forgiving, really giving of their time and their connections and their introductions. So be purposeful in building out that network, develop those relationships. So many people ask, should I print 500 copies of my deck? Should I email 500 people and email it out? It's all about the warm introduction. Find that investor who you want to target and get that warm introduction, as John said. It's through LinkedIn and the beauty of finding out who those first and second connections are, you can find somebody who should be willing to put your deck in front of the right set of eyes. But as you head to Resi next week, and as you head to Bio, as you head to San Diego, as you're in the airport, as you're on the plane, have your elevator pitch ready. That's probably, for next week, for this environment, for the receptions, as you're walking down the street, as you bump into old friends, as you bump into somebody who you haven't seen for 10 or 15 years, that 30-second elevator pitch is critical. You need to be laser focused about what you're doing now, why it's exciting, what you need, what you're looking for. It's not the same vanilla pitch necessarily to everybody. If you bump into somebody who's a VC, it's got one flavor. If you bump into somebody who might have some connections to some service providers, it's another flavor. But tell the story of why your company is interesting, something that'll hook the listener and something that'll make them want to follow up with a deeper meeting. Make them say, "Hey, send me a copy of the deck. Hey, let me take a picture of your LinkedIn QR code. Let's connect in the next 2 or 3 weeks." You want an elevator pitch that's going to hook them in, because you're not going to do a deal next week, but might be the first step to something more. What else have I forgotten, John and Ariana?
Yeah, I think one thing we had talked about also is, yes, getting that elevator pitch ready, making those introductions, and then when you've got them on the hook, making sure you're in a good position to actually reel them in, and having those materials ready in your data room, right? We talked a bit, Jay and John, about having your data room ready and having that be clear and organized, and making sure you having all your documents ready to go. You're not scrambling. If someone is, hopefully that elevator pitch gets them going and they reach out. So you want that data room to be ready to go and you're not scrambling for it. So including, patent filings, assignment documents, employment agreements, contracts, but also being really sensitive and being careful and holding back certain materials, right? Not including lead structures, lead molecules at the outset, being thoughtful about what that tiered approach is to giving material. So I think just on that bullet point, Jay, of being ready to go, assume you're going to be successful and manifest that, right? And be ready.
That's great. That's great. In the pitch deck, you can find this online, right? It's easy. I think everybody's just got a good general sense of what should be in the pitch deck. But one thing that I see a lot, Ariana, I'm gonna throw this to you specifically. One thing that I see a lot is too much science in the pitch deck. And I'm continuously amazed by just how scientifically savvy some investors are. And they really do have the ability to dig deep. But for that initial deck, how do you make that decision? What's enough versus what's too much? What's that perfect Goldilocks zone for science in the pitch deck?
Yeah, and I will try not to give the lawyer answer of it depends, right, Jay? But it certainly does to a certain extent. But I think, right, having that clear description of the problem and what your solution is, but tying your science to what that solution is, right? It's just a tease in a certain extent of, here is what we're doing. Maybe here's a little bit of, evidence that it works, but we can get into the details at a later point. And depending on who your audience is, the amount of science you include, is going to vary. So having that be, different levels of depth ready to go, depending on what you're putting in. And then, as the patent attorney on the group, I would be remiss if I didn't say, making sure you have legal review what you're putting in for science, and that you are not disclosing something that you're not protected by and you're not ready to be showing, right? Scientists are so excited to show their data, and they should be, right? And that's great. But if you aren't protecting that appropriately, going and showing investors that, non-confidential decks that have science in them, you got to be really careful about. I could go on and on about that, but I'll pause a little bit on that. Yeah.
Sounds great. Thanks, Ariana.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead. I thought I heard somebody jump in. what investors are looking for is, as Ariana said, you want to tie your science, tie your solution to a problem, and make sure that you've got a really clear definition of what that problem is. And you want to focus on the economics of the problem. You want to make sure that they're going to actually be customers. You want to make sure that there's a value proposition for either a revenue stream to yourself or a revenue stream that's going to attract a potential partner or a potential acquirer. Um, your as you're talking to investors, they're going to need to see economic viability. The main thing that they're looking for is IP, IP, IP. The first thing that they're going to want to know is obviously what are you chasing, but that second question is what's the IP look like? What's the life? What's the freedom to operate landscape? How crowded is the landscape? Who's the competition? Who's in there? What licenses do you need? If you've got a company that's, a little bit more, this audience, I'm assuming, headed to bio, headed to resi, it's probably a little bit more life sciences. So patents are everything. But for companies that are a little bit more brand oriented or app oriented, it's all about the trademarks. It's all about the domain names. It's all about the social media presence, right? None of that is really that important for life sciences companies, but for a company, depending on brand, it's everything. Um, the communities that you're building, if you are a patient organization, the potential acquirers, potential partners are going to be so interested in companies and startups that have been able to tap into patient communities, ready populations for clinical trials or for customer bases. So the story is going to attract the attention of those investors, but you want to be able to focus on the positives. You want a nice, clean story. As Ariana said, you want to build a nice, good data room. You don't want complicated corporate history. You don't want to have to be explaining what these warts are in your past. I mean, all companies have them, so to some extent you'll have to, but you don't want to. You want to focus on the growth, the product, the market, the path forward. So the cleaner you can make things, the cleaner the data room, the better organized things are, the better the corporate approvals for what you've gotten. And frankly, we're going to be turning to you in a minute, John. The cleaner the IP trail, the license agreements coming in, it's going to make the negotiations for the license agreements going back out that much cleaner. And probably the most important thing that investors are looking for: what are you going to do with my money? How far is that going to get you? And when am I going to get it back? So you want to make sure that in your deck, you lay out for them the trail of the life cycle of what their investment is going to buy and what their investment is going to get them. So, there's some tips as you're meeting people next week. I think this deck is going to be available. I think that you're going to be able to get this on replay. You can digest this, but everybody you meet next week, you want to make sure you obviously follow up with them, keep it warm. Hopefully next week, a lot of you will be making the first contacts with people who you'll be keeping in touch with for months and years. Investors and potential partners will want to get the updates and hear how things are going. They're as interested in meeting you as you are in meeting them. So it takes a lot of work to keep those lines of communication open, but it'll definitely pay off as you grow your company down the road. So let me turn it over to John now to talk about actual deal making.
All right, thanks, Jay. Jay just mentioned, we are going to turn to the partnering deal making side of things. On the next slide, we're going to go through some of the key terms that you want to pay attention to during the negotiation process. But first, I want to go through a few matters, things to be doing while you're negotiating, or even before you start the negotiation of those agreements, to put yourself in a better position. And then one final note on the terms: we are not going to be talking about financials. They are obviously key. They're obviously heavily negotiated. But they're going to be dependent on the particular deals. I mean, at best we'll maybe talk about the types of money or financials that might be needed, but that's as far as we're going to go. All right, so the first bullet, their long process, plan accordingly. this is right along the lines of Jay's talk with the fundraising. It's a long process. It doesn't happen overnight. For an academic license, an in-license, if you're spinning out of a university, it's 6 to 12 months minimum to get that academic license done. Sometimes you might get something done quicker than that, but more likely it's going to get pushed beyond that. And that time is roughly spent between both the term sheet and the actual license agreement. On the commercial out license that you're eventually going to do, most likely, you need to figure you're gonna need 18 months or more from the first contact with that eventual partner. Um, and that's just what it typically is. Again, sometimes it's shorter, but more likely it would be longer than that. Again, as an investment, stay in touch, regular email updates, connect at conferences and other events. Just let them know you're still out there and keep them apprised of what's going on. They're very good at keeping tabs on folks while they're doing that. And then for the commercial out license, see if you can find an internal champion early in that process. You have someone inside the company that's as excited about getting the technology as you are about getting the technology to them. The process will go a lot quicker, and you'll have someone running interference for you inside the company. Couple other points there. You're going to have a main contact, even if you have this internal champion. Be careful about jumping over the designated contacts. If you don't like the response, that usually gets a negative reaction. Sometimes you have to, but again, be very cautious about doing that. And then keep in mind, until you get an NDA, I'll flip it around the other way. Once you get an MDA, you can, you have real interest. So that's a winning, that's a win for you guys right there, just getting the NDA. Obviously, before you get the NDA, you have to limit your disclosures. Ariana touched upon that on your data room. Don't be putting any trade secrets in there. Don't be putting any trade secrets, any highly confidential information until you get that appropriate NDA in place. Second, so option agreements. This is primarily something that you need to worry about and consider when you're doing your academic in-license, if you're doing one of those, right? And this is a tool that allows you to preserve your rights until you are ready to talk, or conversely, until the university is ready to talk to you. So from your perspective, maybe you can't, or maybe you don't want to pay for the license at this point in time, right? You can figure for a typical in-license from an academic institution, you're going to pay an upfront of 10 to 50K, and that's going to be due on day one, and then you're going to owe them for the past patent expenses. Those could range anywhere from a few thousand to $100,000. So if you don't have the money and you want to preserve your rights, the option agreement is the way to go. Typically in an option agreement, you can get a 1-year option. It's usually between $2,000 and $8,000 is what I typically see. And as well as you have to pick up the payment of the patent expenses during the option period. But when you're doing that, you typically don't see it in the first draft, but often you can defer those payments. So if you're going to an option agreement, and even that $8,000 or $2,000 for that matter, is tough to pay depending on what stage of the cycle you're in. So if you could defer that until after a later date or a designated fundraise of X dollars, you get your cake and eat it too. And then for the field, at least for the option agreement, the broader the better. The option agreement allows you to preserve your rights to negotiate for and license in the IP. You may or may not have a good feel for how much of that space that's covered by the technology you want to cover or can cover. So you want the option agreement to have as broad a field as possible. You can always narrow it when you get to the license agreement, but the opposite is not true, because in the meantime, if they're talking to someone else outside a narrow field, it may or may not be available to you, and then it's too late.
One thing, John, I think as people are coming away from Resi and Bio next week, I mean, there will be people who are going to enter into option agreements. I think the main thing, I mean, a lot of what you just said, I mean, the option agreement is their chance to really start locking down the deal, right? That's where the field gets negotiated, as you just said. That's where the territory gets negotiated. That's where the scope of the grant gets. It's so important to talk to your attorney early in that process, whoever that attorney may be. It may feel like, oh, it's just an option, but it's so important to walk out of San Diego next week and pick up the phone and just pull your attorney into the loop and say, hey, this might be coming down the pike. Here's the specific conversation I had. What should I watch out for?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And yeah, it's just an option, but the option gives you the exclusive rights for, like I said, a year. Typically, if everything's going forward in good faith and you still haven't, they're readily extend these things for another year, another 6 months. So long as things are moving forward and you're being open with them, you can preserve those rights for 1 or 2, maybe even 3 years, um, until you're ready. The flip side of that, sometimes the university may not be ready to talk to you. They don't think you're sufficiently funded, or they don't think you're sufficiently manned or the right team. So they want to see you develop further before they even enter into the license negotiation. So they may say, okay, we'll do you the option agreement. So we'll preserve your rights because we like where you're headed, and we like you. But we just can't, we're not going to commit the resources to do the license agreement, which are costly, until we get a better feel that you are actually going to be in a position to pursue the license. All right, we already touched on the third bullet, diligence preparation. As everyone said already, when someone knocks on your door, you have to be able to open it and say, here you go. You can't say, I'll come back 6 months, I'll have everything you need. It needs to be ready. Again, IP is of prime importance. It's not the only thing, but the rest of it really is immaterial unless there's sufficient IP to form a company around. And as Ariana touched on, there are numerous other areas. Essentially, anything you're doing, they're going to want all the records related to. And at some point, you're going to get probably a 20-page single space diligence request. And it's going to ask for all records for corporate records, capitalization records. If you're an FDA approved product, it's going to be any records you have on reimbursability and coverage. And by the way, that's a huge point for pitches. If you're doing a pitch and you have a reimbursable product, you need to cover that. Otherwise, you're missing a key point. They're going to want all documents regarding your financings, generally just any material agreements. Ariana, you mentioned this as well. They're going to want employee agreements, including looking for a PIIA for every employee, which is essentially the assignment and confidentiality agreement. Any proceedings, governance, you're just going to have to turn over every relevant document to them at some point, particularly if it's big pharma. If it's something other than big pharma, it might be a little less than that.
Yeah.
All right,
Great.
term sheets. It says to lock down. Lockdown obviously is in quotes because it doesn't really, most term sheets are non-binding, and that's to everyone's benefit, but it certainly sets the expectations. It's not to say people don't depart from term sheets. It happens quite a bit, but what you're trying to prevent, or at least highly discourage, is a radical departure from the existing terms. Every time, the term sheet, boils everything down to the business essentials, and then you go to the agreement. There's always things as you're getting into the details that lead you to change something. But again, you hopefully you're making small changes and not radical changes. That changes really the whole terms of the deal. The other reason to do, a couple other reasons to do a term sheet is, again, it's an expensive process. You'll identify any deal breakers during this process. There's no sense spending 9 months trying to negotiate a highly detailed, incredibly expensive final agreement, and find out 9 months in, oh, we don't agree on the scope of the field, or we don't agree on the territory, or the financials aren't quite what we want them to be. So find those deal breakers early, and if you can't overcome them, walk away and find someone else you can do the deal with. And then lastly,
Got a question for you about the term sheets. Ariana, how important is it to sort of figure out from the outset who has the right to control prosecution and maintenance and patent defense. Is that something that you'd recommend figuring out up front in the term sheet stage, or can that wait until a little bit later?
I mean, I think getting that conversation early, and John, you can chime in because you've probably seen more than I have on that, to be honest. But right, it can never be, I don't think it could be a bad thing to start talking about that. But John, what do you usually see at the term sheet stage? Do you
Well,
see that as much?
I see that quite a bit, and maybe I'm a bias. I am also a registered patent attorney, and I spent my first 10 years as an IP attorney. So I'm very versed in the IP terms. So I mean, for the big pharma or big biotech, there's gonna be a lot of negotiation over this in great detail. And it can go in so many different ways. But yeah, I see that all the time. Um,
At the term sheet stage,
at the term
John?
sheet stage,
Yeah,
yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
And again, I mean, some agreements you might get away with a 2 or 3 page term sheet, and that used to be not too uncommon, particularly on the academic side. On a commercial agreement, your term sheet is going to be 20, 30 pages long, right? So you're thinking it's just a really couple page document. It's not. And sometimes, I mean, I've done one that was 30 pages long, and 10 of those pages were just IP, and that's not uncommon.
And I would say 9 times out of 10, I get brought into a license when it's past the term sheet, you're actually negotiating the license or agreement. And then us IP attorneys are going, well, wait a second. That's like you're giving up ownership, or ownership's
Yeah,
not clearly
yeah,
articulated, right? Because most, I think, licensing attorneys are not previous patent attorneys like John. It might not be as sensitive to some of it. So yeah, we often are seen at a much later stage, which can be challenging because you have gotten so far that now all of a sudden we're bringing up a potentially new issue. So I think, like everything we're talking about, the earlier the better to have a lot of these discussions.
yeah, yeah. And this is mostly on the commercial side. Academic, we know what the IP is. They're going to own the
Yeah.
IP. You're going to get to write along with the prosecution and say, make comments. You're going to pay for it all, and you're going to own everything new you do with it. And there's not that's just how they go. There's nothing to be discussed there. Commercial agreements, it's a whole different ballgame.
Yeah.
Okay, one last point on term sheets. The very important usage of these is you can secure your exclusivity and confidentiality in the term sheet, right? Most of these term sheets I mentioned are non-binding, but it's very common to provide a exclusivity provision and a confidentiality provision within the term sheet, both of which are binding on the parties for a specified term. So during that term, neither party can talk with third parties about this, and you have to protect all the other parties' confidential information, including the fact that you're even discussing this agreement. Yeah, and again, as I started beginning, it sets expectations so that you won't change things, but you still may. You will at certainly some point. Lastly, on this slide, consider using consulting agreements and sponsored research agreements. This is ways to develop the IP. Particularly, again, this is more of an academic focus. It's not really a commercial agreement type of thing. So. And why is this important? Because an academic license, and we'll see that commercial licenses are different, you're only going to get whatever IP exists as of the effective date, whether it's patents or know-how. And you know there's still ongoing work there. So one way to tap into that work would be with the sponsored research agreement, where you continue to do research with the laboratory at the university. You're sponsored, so you're paying for it. Hopefully, they will just give you outright ownership of the IP coming out of it. Probably not, but they'll at least give you an option, an option to negotiate for a license to add that new IP to your license you're negotiating with them. And then on the consulting agreement, this is a way for you to get started on the IP you want to develop with some of your know-how that you're bringing to your new company. You got to keep in mind, obviously, that there are several issues there. There's conflicts of interest between you, the company, and your responsibility to your obligations to the company as well as the institution. You have commitment limitations. You can only, most universities prevent an academic uh, employee from spending too much time outside of their academic job. And then uh, who gets to own, like I said, the IP. Um, and that's the biggest conflict right there. As an employee, your primary obligation is to the university. So when you do a consulting agreement, you need to make sure that it excludes any IP generated using the university's resources, to make sure that it remains in the company owns the IP they're developing as while you're acting as a consultant. Um, and then, yeah, I'll just leave that there because I think we should get to the terms. All right. Field is a very, not surprisingly, a key aspect of the agreement. Again, for the academic license, like the option agreement, the broader the field, the better for you. It provides you for optionality down the road. It provides you room for a pivot if need be. So, instead of just getting, the treatment of disease X, try to get all therapeutic applications or all diagnostic applications or all medical device applications. The broader it is in the license into you, that, like I said, obviously gives you more room to move and move pivot if need be. The catch there is the university is reluctant to do those. So they're going to probably add a clawback provision that says if they're going to take it back if you don't use it in a sufficient amount of time. So when that comes up, uh, if it comes up, you want to make sure you negotiate for a lead period, a grace period, whatever you want to call it. I've seen it go from 3 to 10 years from the effective date before they can even trigger that callback. You want to make sure that the trigger is not something they just decide to do on a whim, that is triggered by a bona fide third-party interest who has actually provided a development plan that makes sense, so that there's a real reason for them to take back some of the field rather than just having buyer's remorse. You want to make sure there are exclusions in that clawback provision that says that it's not applicable if the proposed application by the third party is harmful to or competitive with your existing programs. And then you need to ensure you have the first right to pursue that proposed application before they go back to that third party and say, here, you can have a license to it.
Yeah. I want to make sure we have enough time to hit some of our IP slides. So maybe just one or two more points on this.
I'm done with field. There's nothing in commercial that doesn't apply to commercial assets. Well, I just say commercial, you want the scope of the license should be as narrow as possible going out, again, to preserve your optionality.
And as broad as possible coming in.
Yeah, that's where we started. Broad and narrow.
Buy low, so high.
Just let me touch on two things real quick. Sub-licensing and subcontracting. You're definitely you're going to need these rights for any partnering. Without them, you can't, and particularly for the sub-licensing through multiple tiers. Without them, you're not going to do the partnering agreement. So you need to make sure you get these rights in the academic license with as few restrictions as possible. Your partner is going to demand that they have the rights to sub-license pretty much at will and through multiple tiers as need be. So make sure you get those rights. We talked about diligence already. Governance, there's going to be a JSC in any collaboration agreement. You need to get this one right. The biggest part of the governance section is decision-making. Who gets to make the final? Typically, it's consensus. If there's a dispute, who gets to make the final decision? Typically, licensee gets some, licensor gets some, and some are accepted and they go to dispute resolution. You need to make sure you maintain control of your resources and the like. So again, that's a very important one for you to do. We'll skip IP ownership because Ariana has already covered most of that. And in termination, I'll just add, sub-licenses need to be, you're going to be required to provide for sub-license survival. Otherwise, you won't be able to do a deal if that's not there. And then one of the most negotiated positions is as the licensor, what other technology comes back to you if the other party terminates or you terminate for their breach? Do you get any of it back? And that includes what you gave them, perhaps the development candidate, and what they've developed. Sometimes you get none. Most of the time you get none. Some you get all, but you want to get as much back as possible. And then I'll stop right there and turn it over to Ariana for 15 minutes of IP glory.
I can teach everyone IP in about 10 minutes now. So, right, some things that help solidify the importance of IP is certainly highlighting the issues we see, especially with early stage companies. And so one of those is disclosing your invention before you have patent protection. So I mentioned earlier about how you should have legal counsel checking your pitch decks, right? And that's because pitching is a disclosure, right? So especially those non-confidential pitch decks. So, if you make a disclosure before you file your patent, you're going to have a really hard time obtaining a patent for your invention. So really being careful about what you're disclosing prior to filing a patent application. And then even a lot of people think they are fine if there's a confidentiality agreement, right? You often have your non-con deck, your con deck, and okay, well, I can share whatever I want. I'm in, under confidentiality, so that's not a public disclosure. So yes, not a public disclosure, but you're running the risk of someone, potentially misappropriating your information and filing their own patent applications. And sure, there's lots of different types of legal action to deal with that, but it creates a mess and it's expensive. So the best practice is to have a patent application filed before you're, disclosing too much about your invention. So always keeping that in mind. And then also if it's important to have correct inventorship on your patent application. So there's multiple reasons for this, the simplest being that incorrect inventorship can invalidate an issued patent. But another is that if you fail to list an inventor, but they should be listed, right? And, they can argue that they should be inventor. Well, if the company doesn't have their rights assigned to them, then that individual has the ability to go assign or license their rights to a third party. So again, you can really create a lot of issues if you have inventorship incorrect or you're not being thoughtful about it. Or to the third bullet point, you're not obtaining assignments from your inventors, right? Those we talked earlier about, employment agreements having assignment language in them. That's certainly helpful. But right, our best practice is to obtain separate patent assignments. And not having a clean chain of title, investors, pharma, partners, they're going to pick up on that right away. That's one of the first diligence items is, do you own your IP, right? And so you want to make sure you have that all done. And then another issue we certainly see is misunderstanding of obligations if you have any IP that's funded by the government. So there's specific regulations that are related to government-funded IP that's under a specific act, the Bayh-Dole Act. Certainly, I'm not going to get heavily into that, but for example, one of the regulations there is, products need to be substantially manufactured in the U.S. And so if you don't have an understanding of that requirement, you don't have a plan to either, satisfy that requirement or obtain a waiver, that's something that could come out into diligence as well. So you need to make sure you're aware of various regulations and requirements based on the type of funding that you might have. And then another issue we're seeing, we've always seen, but I think there's been a bigger discussion about it with the increase in AI usage and publicly available data sets, is again, a lot of what I'm saying, again, is your IP encumbered? Are you free to use your IP? So if you're using research tools or software, open source databases, and you're using those to generate commercial products, but you don't actually have the ability to do that, your IP is going to be potentially encumbered, or you're violating license agreements, contracts, right? You're having breach of various agreements if you're using open source software, data sets, research tools that don't allow you to ultimately create and sell a commercial product. So something we're constantly trying to be aware of with clients is making sure there's an understanding of how they're using either publicly available information or even information you're purchasing, understanding what that actually allows you to do. Research purposes are very different than commercial purposes. So that's an issue we certainly see a lot early stage. Jay, you can go to the next slide. And so if we know about the issues, right, that we often see, we can certainly try to strengthen ourselves before getting into diligence, before that data room gets open. And one of those, certainly one tool to think about is auditing your existing patent portfolio, right? So what is your patent portfolio actually covering? What's your scope of your patents? And where's the gaps? Now, you don't have to have a perfect patent portfolio, certainly, especially early stage, but you need to have a plan and a strategy and be able to articulate that. Generally, we're not seeing an expectation of having lots of issued patents and this perfectly, existing patent portfolio at the time, especially for early stage companies, but that you have a plan and you know how you're starting to execute that plan, right? Being able to articulate that. Something that certainly comes up is if you have platform technology and you're using platform technology to generate various products, and how are you protecting platform versus product? Again, being able to articulate that strategy, being thoughtful about that strategy. And then also thinking about foreign patent rights. So, right, again, have you done the analysis of where's your market going to be? Understanding where investors in pharma expect to see patent rights outside of the US. Because certainly, there is potential negativity if it's only in the US. There's a potential large market in Europe or some of the Asian countries. So being thoughtful again about what those foreign patent rights are. And again, doesn't need to be that it's been executed, but that you have a plan and the ability to do so. Or again, describing that the funds you're looking for are going to be used to execute that plan. And then if you're intending to rely on trade secrets, making sure you have an understanding of what that actually means. What's it actually mean to be a trade secret? It's not simply just keeping things confidential, but really formalizing a process to protect those trade secrets. So that's something that comes up a lot during diligence is, do you have trade secrets? And if so, what are you doing to protect them? And making sure that meets the requirements, as there is a higher burden of protection that's required. And then one of the most common questions I get is, do I need to do FTO? And if so, how much? And so, right, obviously it depends, but we counsel a lot of clients about doing some level of FTO before you're going into diligence. There's various ways you can approach FTO. Often it's too early to do a true FTO. You might not even have your lead molecule figured out, right? But can you be operating in the space? What does it look like? Really identifying any low-hanging fruit. You don't want to go in blind, having no idea, and then you're in, someone that's doing diligence on you immediately finding a huge problem, right? Because you're going to have to then do a lot of work to be able to answer that, do we not infringe? Is there an invalidity opinion? It can get really complicated and really quickly if you have no idea of what you're going into. So I think it's really important to do some level of it. And again, but at the same time, there's an understanding you're not going to have a full FTO analysis done when you're looking for funding. And investors, pharma partners, they're going to do their own analysis. So you're going to learn a lot through that process itself from them. And then, again, we talked a lot about IP ownership, making sure it's really clear in your agreements who owns improvements, who's going to have ownership, is it following inventorship analysis? That is a big thing to be very clear on, again, with your IP.
Yeah.
And then the
Got a
last
fun.
slide. Oh, yep, go ahead, Jay.
I've just got a fun horror story about
Oh,
a
yeah.
client who had hired a contractor to write their firmware, and the
Mm.
agreement didn't say, "And we, the contractor, hereby assign to the client the ownership." It only cost $25,000 to write in the first place, but in the context of the speed to get this M&A deal done, they had to go back. The contractor held them up for ransom and charged them $100,000 for the assignment. And the deal was only 700,000. And so, significant piece had to be spent to just bribe the contractor to sign over that assignment. So it's important.
Yeah, thinking about that early and often is
Awesome.
super important. And then my last slide is just to emphasize exclusivity. So, we talked about this a little bit at the beginning, but this is always what, we're looking at as counsel from investors, from our partners. What's the loss of exclusivity? What is that? What is that? What does it mean? What's the date, right? That date of exclusivity, loss of exclusivity, will impact the value of your company, right? So that's constantly what we're being asked. And there's different types of exclusivity. There's patent exclusivity and there's data regulatory exclusivity. And understanding really, and again, being able to articulate where your strength is going to impact how your IP is being evaluated, how your company is being evaluated. And having a patent portfolio that has both maybe some broad protection in it, depending on what technology you're in, but really product specific claims, that has multiple patent families, this layered patent portfolio. That's going to signal to investors, partners, that you have a durable and strong patent portfolio. And so that exclusivity, particularly if it's relying on patent exclusivity, is strong and is defendable. So being able to clearly articulate the scope of your patent portfolio, the duration of your patent protection, and how that overlays with when you expect to have FDA approval, assuming that's the type of technology you're going for, is crucial to what is being considered for these analyses. I think I did it all really quick, Jay.
Know what? That's you. Thanks to both of you. That was beautiful. So we do have a couple of final thoughts for everybody. It's sort of obvious based on a lot of the points that we've already made. From my perspective, build those relationships early. Build them before you need the money. As John said, it takes time. It takes multiple contacts to build trust, build a relationship. The investors are investing in you as much as they're investing in their technology. And it is relationship based. So build those relationships. In terms of the actual hook, you want to lead with the problem that you're solving, lead with your solution. It sounds obvious, but so quickly, so many people don't focus on the problem and the solution, they figure on the how, and they dive straight into the science. So John, I think this third bullet was a summary of yours.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, it's early in this in the process, but the decisions you make in the licensing and in in all three of these areas early on are going to have, as Jay says, a lasting impact. They will shape your control and your economics and optionality for years afterwards, and well, to a great extent, determine your long-term value. So we got to get them right at the beginning. It's hard to recover at the back end.
Yeah.
Yeah. And on that last point, right, just making that IP story as airtight as possible. What's your patent protection? Is it strong? What's your FTO? It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be clear.
Yeah. So Max, thank you.
I
Appreciate you
will
having
chime in
us.
here, and there was a question that was asked. An attendee had asked, is it important to have a patent litigator look over a university license? How about prosecute a patent?
A patent litigator, I would say that's I mean, it's probably a little premature to have a patent litigator look at it, and probably too expensive. I think, you know, to be honest, but we can certainly do, we look through academic applications as patent prosecutors, patent counsel, to get a sense of what is being covered and how strong it is and where there's room for the company to develop their own IP, right? Ultimately, you have your academic IP, that's great, but you want to have, again, a very clear story of what's your own IP going to be. So I think it's critical to have patent counsel look at it, but maybe not a patent litigator.
Yeah,
John, what's
I
your
agree.
take? Yeah.
I don't see why a litigator, unless there's some specific concerns that there's a litigation concern already in the back of your brain. No, that's way too early, and there's no value add as far as I can tell.
I mean, you want to be thinking about, is this IP enforceable? What are the odds that the claim is going to be upheld? Um, what possible defense is going. But I think you know, patent prosecution attorneys.
Mhm.
That's their bread and butter. They spend all day looking into things like how strong the claim's going to be, and what's the coverage going to look like. And so I think just a regular patent attorney, as opposed to having the litigator, they've got the expertise to protect you.
Perfect. I hope that answers the question. And if there's any other questions while I say my final thank yous, please feel free to ask them. Um,
Yeah.
I got one more that come in. It said, could you please comment on protecting platform IP while also out licensing assets from the platform?
Yeah, I
Sure.
mean,
So,
oh yeah, go ahead, John.
I,
Might
I,
be,
I mean,
but
you can license out the platform IP. You can't give them control of it. You can maybe give them, sometimes you'll give them ability to participate in a prosecution, but you need to maintain control of that platform IP at all times. And you need to have final say on the prosecution of that platform IP. Um, Regardless of the fact that you're going to, in the license agreement and a commercial agreement, they get access to any IP you have that's relevant to their products. So they're going to get access to it, but you need to make sure you maintain your ownership.
yeah, like I like to when we're, developing a patent strategy to the best that we can is you have your platform protected in one filing, one patent family, and you have products coming out of that platform protected separately. It makes them easier to certainly license out. But yeah, being really thoughtful about platform
Yeah,
versus product coming out of the platform.
yeah, and you need to also own the improvements to the platform.
Hmm.
Period. They can't have those either.
Perfect. Well, I will say again, thank you, Jay, John, and Ariana. We do greatly appreciate it. And while an hour is never going to be enough time to dive into all these concepts deep in depth, we are lucky, and there will be a team speaking at Resi San Diego. And so we'll have a panel of speakers from Foley Hoag represented there. And again, for anyone in attendance, I will be sending both the recording of this session as well as the actual slides out. So you'll have my email, and you'll also be given Jay, John, and Ariana's. So if you have any other questions, please feel free to reach out to either myself or them directly. So
Thanks,
thank you so
everybody.
much.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Thank
John.
you,
Thanks,
Max.
Ariana.
All
Yep.
right. Have a good one.
Bye,
Bye.
everyone.